2. Life in the Absence of Samantha, 2000. This is the story of Sam, who cared for nothing at all. For everything she thinks is real is not really real at all. There is nothing past the path outside the door. No world, no life, no greater meaning. I often wonder what is ultimately important in this life. I think it is not material things, or money, or being good at something that matters to a few, and not many, or even many save for those few. I do not believe it is hard work, despite everything my mother taught me growing up. I think it is simply to exist, to have experiences, both good and bad, to see as many beautiful places that you can. Who, in the end, lives more? The man who works 11 hours a day at a job he hates to afford the prison he lives in and buries himself under obligations and finance. Or the homeless man who wanders the highway hungry and broke, yet sees the morning sun on the mountains in the distance and feels the rough rock beneath his feet. Sometimes I wonder if big dreams and plans are the folly of man. I've witnessed a cat resting contentedly in the warm glow of the mid-morning sun, not sleeping, yet existing. Though I do not claim to know what that cat may be thinking, I believe it is not of big plans or aspirations of becoming important. There is contentment there, in the sunlight, which I fear I will never find in my own life. As I see everyone around me hurrying and scurrying about like ants at the sight of spilled sugar, I take a moment to realize there is no shame in a simple life. My name is Samantha, as is the norm for people who call themselves Sam, and I am more than just a name, yet less than important. It's probably enough that you just know my name, for any more would be an assumption on my own part that we could be more than just passing acquaintances, or worse, friends. However, there are some details that I will share to give a better understanding of the story, for it is the rest of the world that is important, and I am, fortunately, just a small detail. I am 19. I have short brown hair and blue eyes, and I have what some people call a problem with dealing with life. What some would call motivational issues, I see instead as being a realist. I simply do not feel the same way that others around me do about life, and how we make our own individual ways through it. I do not understand the concept of jobs. I mean, I understand the necessity for food and shelter and clothing, etc. However, cannot wrap my mind around the idea that we are meant to spend most of our lives in a position that we hate, daydreaming the day away and counting minutes, like ground control at NASA, counting away the seconds until the big launch. What misery is worth happiness? At what point am I supposed to trade whatever small share of happiness I am afforded away for an abundance of misery? See, at this point, I've graduated high school. Barely. I paid attention to the things that interested me, the simple phrases of the English language that caught my ear in the right way, the moments of history that felt important, and the inner workings of the natural world around me. However, school has left me only feeling more disconnected. I saw people studying every day for a future that I dreaded, sneaking only moments to speak with those they sat next to, nervous that the teacher would scold them at the mere slip of a word from our eager teenage lips, resorting instead to past notes as emotionless as internet conversations. Everyone back then was preparing for something, a future of some sort or fashion, one that was full of hopes and the promise of sex and money. I suppose I was preparing for something completely different, and that was, well, nothing. Nothing at all. However, I have always felt that I am somehow evening things out, or making the chances better for someone else who might have higher aspirations for success. Things became worse when my mother, a single mom of indiscriminate age who also bears no real importance here, began repeatedly inquiring about my college intentions. I, however, stated that I had none, and that I would see what came up in the future. However, in my mind, as cluttered as the shelf in my bedroom, I had already decided that I did not care for any more schooling. After all, if school had taught me one thing, it was that being forced to be somewhere all day was something more akin to torture than enlightenment. And if school had taught me two things, it was that dealing with busy, self-important people on a regular basis was something I also did not wish to continue with in any further direction than I already had. So, I suppose that is enough backstory, I hope, to get the point where I am right now. This is the future that everyone else, save myself, worried about so much. Perhaps you've gathered enough information from my thoughts to begin to understand what type of person I am. If you have, I'm not sure that is something to entirely be proud of, for either of our parts. After all, it is assumptions that have gotten us this far, and regardless of what you think of me, or what ideas you've formed in your mind, I am Samantha, who prefers Sam, and I am leaving this world soon. It is 4 p.m. I can tell by the way my old white plastic watch beeps noisily on my wrist. I haven't changed the alarm since school ended 2 years ago. I'm not sure if I do it simply as a reminder of those long days, or just out of laziness. The truth is probably closer to the fact that I've forgotten what the buttons do, or have no motivation to press them. I've worn the same watch for nearly 3 years straight. I think that if it ever went missing, or the cheap plastic band was to suddenly break, I would miss it somehow. Not as much as an amputee misses a limb and still feels its presence, but similar. If it were to vanish one day, I wonder if it would still beep. Not for real, yet in my mind. I wonder if every time it turned to 4 o'clock, a series of beeps would go off in my mind, letting me know, reminding me. It begins to rain, and I'm glad that my watch is waterproof. With my overbearing mother pressuring me more and more about my future, I decided to just take off one day. I sold what little possessions I had and took only what clothing I could carry in my backpack. A hooded sweatshirt that was colorful and warm. A pair of worn jeans that fit snugly. They were 2 of my favorite things. I call them they as though they had some greater purpose other than just being clothing, or even a soul or personality. Perhaps they did. Who am I to say with certainty? I slipped out one warm autumn evening, looking back at the house that I felt was more prison than home. I knew that I was doing the right thing when it did not feel strange to leave. Sometimes, when you do something you are unsure of, there are these little feelings, like strings that try and pull you back. They're not very strong, but I swear they are there. However, as I said before, it was not strange to leave, and the strings were not at my back pulling me home. I walked on into the darkness, with a warm breeze that seemed like it was giving me a push. That night, I camped out beneath the stars in a small wood just outside of town. It was, to me, the definition of peaceful. The only sound was the calming whisper of the wind and the gentle rustle of falling leaves. The sounds of crickets were simple, yet the more I listened, the more complex and beautiful their songs became. I do not know for sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me. However, I am completely sure that it does not matter. After all, when you are alone, does it matter what is real and what isn't? For years after school, I had sat alone in my bedroom, the curtains closed and in some state of either depression or exhaustion. At some point, the world outside ceased to exist for me, and perhaps for all. I was not out there, so I cannot say with certainty that everyone went about their business. For all I know, in the absence of Samantha, everyone could have decided that the only purpose in life was to have a bit of fun, and had all taken the day off to spend with their families and gone bowling or something like that. An entire town gone bowling. As interesting as it sounds, even I know the idea is absolutely absurd. However, it is not going to stop me from imagining it anyway. I slept that night with an old shirt rolled beneath my head, beneath a tall ash tree that made me feel comforted in some small way. I'd imagine it to be the same way that young dogs like to sleep next to their mother, and it is comforting to be beside something larger than you, something that will have you, something that is not offended or offending, something solid in a world that is often soft. I had a dream, but it is too personal to recall here, something about a boy in the back seat of a car, something special, and yet brutal in a way that only young love can be. My watch has stopped beeping. The rain is still hard and strong. I feel it against my body like a cold shower. Yet I feel strangely warm, almost hot even. That night I slept out. I woke up pretty sore, to be honest. It was a cloudy day and was a bit cooler than the night before. That was sometimes the unfortunate thing about weather. It often does what it wants to on its own agenda. However, if it were any other way, I am sure that the world would somehow be less mysterious, and in turn, a lesser place than it is now. Some people I know believed that life is a lot like the weather, that you just cannot change your fate. I do not know if that is true or not, like many things. However, I would say it is not true. A statement that is probably more true is that a stick in a stream cannot change its fate. We are not sticks. We are people. We're capable of doing things. We make decisions all the time, and so perhaps we change our fate with each decision, with each thought, and every time we change our minds about the world and ourselves. Regardless, my decisions and how I felt about the world led me here, to wake beneath a tree on a cold fall day with a hungry stomach and, regretfully, no food packed into my backpack. I suppose you could say that I was ill-prepared. I would probably not fault you for thinking it. After all, I was definitely thinking it. It was afternoon already. I could tell by my trusty plastic watch. I never gave much thought to time, well, other than thinking that it was often too constricting, and that our reliance upon it was sometimes scary. After all, ever give any thought to how much importance we put on getting somewhere exactly on time? I've often seen people risk their lives in cars to get somewhere, for fear of either getting fired or disappointment on behalf of someone else. I am not saying that being on time isn't important. I am just thinking, after all. Part of a living process is to analyze how you feel about things. It does not mean you will always believe one way, but it is, however, good to know where you stand at different moments in life. To say that I was lost in the woods would be entirely truthful. I had not been lost since I was younger. When I once strayed too far from the hiking path of a park around a lake, I had wandered miles, lost and frantic, and guided only by the distant sound of the highway. I sometimes wonder if it weren't for the highway and the passing cars, if I had been lost forever. I mean, I know you technically cannot get lost forever. Eventually you are either found, or worse, found dead. I eventually ended up at a rest stop on the highway. Thankful just to be around people once more, to feel safe. I suppose that people often have their uses, even if they are living lives that I cannot understand. The attendant at the rest stop called a police officer to give me a ride home. I remember getting into the passenger seat, looking backward over my shoulder once to the back seat where the bad people usually end up. I remember finding it strange to think that there were actually bad people out there in the world somewhere. I had a hard time thinking that not everyone was like everyone else, and that all people were not essentially good in some way. I've heard it said that madness is like being angry all the time, and it scares me to think that someone could get pushed so far by life and circumstances that they permanently stay angry at the world. Up to that point, in a way, I had seen cops as bad people, based on some horror stories I had heard from people my age. It was a strange feeling to have that assumption changed by the act of one person's kindness, even if he was just doing his job. The sky is getting darker. It is not late. Instead, it looks like rain is coming in. I've been wandering about these woods for hours, alone. My head is full of random thoughts and fears, and my heart is beating heavily in my chest. The woods are too quiet to hear any sound of cars or civilization. For the second time in my life, I miss people again. As I walk into a small clearing surrounded by tall trees that are all in full fall color, many different shades of oranges and browns, bright yellows and fiery reds, I see a sign of life. A single deer, tall, brown like the soft color of bare earth, stands in the clearing a short distance away. It is not running, surprisingly. It is looking at me. Its eyes big and strange in a way that it seems understanding of my situation. It looks me down with a fearlessness that I will never possess. We meet eyes, and for a moment I think I see something in those eyes, something I cannot quite explain. I hear a rustle a short ways away in the brush. A man, dressed in a bright orange vest, is holding a rifle. He does not see me. He begins to take aim with his rifle, concentrating only on achieving his kill. For some reason I run out. I do not know exactly why. However, I find myself between the deer that inexplicably does not run and the rifle that has already fired its shot. A spray of red fills the view of the autumn leaves, which begin to fall to the earth more slowly than before. The colors are beautiful. The earth is warm beneath me, on a bed of soft leaves that smell comfortingly of dirt. My watch begins to beep. It is 4 p.m. The rain comes down. The man wearing the orange vest drops the gun, and I'm almost fairly certain that he will never pick it up again. He rushes over, probably confused and scared more than any other person on this earth. The deer has long since darted off into the wood. I often wonder if any life is more important than another. After all, by all logic, the same deer that I gave my life to save could end up shot the next day by a different hunter. Or perhaps the deer could run out onto the highway, causing an accident that could kill others. It is then that I realize that I do not like that kind of thinking. Therefore, I will not subscribe to it. There are many reasons that I should not have done what I did. However, most of them are reasons that I feel you carry with you, and I do not. After all, as I said once before, I feel that there is no shame in a simple life. I just hope that life, in the absence of Samantha, goes on without me, and that perhaps you bowl more, even if you are not any good at it. Be people, after all, and not sticks in streams. My only regret? There isn't much time to really say. After all, your clock is ticking away, and I've got a sunbeam to lie in. I just wonder if my watch will remember me when I'm gone, the way a wheelchair misses a dead amputee.